Mount Mercer rises sharply over the popular Bryant Creek Assiniboine Pass Trail at the northwest end of a long ridge stretching from Cone Mountain to the southeast. I biked the first 6.5 kilometers from the Mountain Shark parking lot before walking up a quiet Bryant Creek Trail another 9. From here it was basically straight up the southwest face to the summit via one long gully system that curved into 2 sets of cliff bands and led all the way to the upper northwest ridge to the summit. Return was the same way. As usual, for any trip up Bryant Creek, I biked the first 6.5 kilometers to the no biking sign and proceeded on foot up the trail. It was a beautiful morning. The smell of fall was in the air and birds were chirping as I quickly made my way through familiar landmarks. It didn't seem to take very long at all, and I was passing the warden cabin at the Marvel Lake Junction and continuing up the trail. Again, it didn't seem to take very long, and just over 2 hours from the parking lot I was already bushwhacking off the trail to the lower southwest slopes of Mount Mercer. After a short and somewhat fierce willow-whack, of course, I found myself at the swampy bottom of an immense avalanche slope leading to cliffs high above on Mercer's southwest face. The lower slopes were choked with small bushes, but soon I was in the clear and enjoying crisp morning air and views back to the Cautley massif back over Bryant Creek. At a junction in the creek, I chose left for no particular reason. I should have gone right, of course, but in the end both worked out. Eventually I had to traverse into the right-hand one anyway. Not far up the ever-steepening drainage, I heard rockfall ahead and noticed a large billy goat gazing sternly down at me. Good thing I'd already donned my helmet, since this felt like a bit of a terrain funnel. As the gully steepened into cliffs, I decided to traverse into the larger southwest drainage to my right. It was where I had my original route line drawn. Soon I was trudging up the main southwest drainage, headed for a line of cliffs above. Although they looked steep and intimidating, there weren't any other options than simply heading right up the gut. So that's where I went.
All right.
The scrambling through the lower cliff band was fun, moderate terrain with mostly good holds on sharply tilted slab and rubble. A few times I had to get out of the very center and deviate right or left, but never far. There were plenty of options to avoid getting too difficult, with ledges and firm rock options where they were needed. It was bloody steep, so don't underestimate it if you do go. Once above the lower cliff band, I realized I wasn't as close as I'd first thought. The southwest face of Mercer is very foreshortened, similar to my experience on Mount Marpole a week previous. A brown layer of scree formed below an even steeper looking upper cliff band. As I started up the brown scree, I decided I would deviate to climber's right and abut the face from there. It looked a little less steep, but it ended at the same complex cliff band as every other route would have. Rick's mention of southeast and northwest in his trip report didn't help my sense of where he went. This was a case of following my nose rather than my brain. On hindsight, I should have simply stayed on course, straight up the middle. As I navigated my way through the upper cliff band, I found myself forced to the left until I tiptoed one last ledge and was back in the central gully. Darn it, I should have just stayed there. Despite plenty of steep terrain, every time I thought I'd be stopped, a reasonable route would present itself. This was great fun scrambling. Ledges appeared on steep slabs just where I wanted them. I wandered back and forth up the gully, trying to keep things in the realm of scrambling and succeeding for the most part. I was still very nervous about the upper mountain, but stubbornly pressed upward. It didn't help that Gaia was totally off in the topo map as I passed under the summit, supposedly, and kept going off the north face, but of course not really. Finally, I ascended one last very steep rubble ramp that felt like it might be near the summit. And it was! I couldn't believe my eyes when I topped out and started a short traverse along an exposed northwest ridge to a crumbling cairn. Yes!
Ha ha ha! Made it! Shit! I honestly didn't think it was gonna happen. Wow! There you go.
I was particularly excited to spot a PVC register in the cairn. Surely this must be Rick's artifact from his 94 ascent. How many others have been up here since? It turns out only 3 of us have stood on the summit of Mercer in the past 30 years. Rick Collier in 1994, Paul Zizka in 2023, and me. Paul and I used the same route via the southwest face. For a peak that's extremely accessible as a day trip off a well-maintained approach trail, it's somewhat surprising that so few people bother with it. It felt very good to make the summit after so many doubts and seemingly complex terrain below. In the end, the route was actually quite simple. Just head into the mess and trust that it'll work out. Descent was fun and engaging down the center of the cliff bands into the lower southwest avalanche gully. I loved how the terrain underfoot kept breaking up into manageable sections despite looking impossible from above and again from below. I kept looking back up what I'd just descended and couldn't believe that it wasn't harder.
Yep. These are always fun. Yeah. Yep. Don't want to put too much weight on that when you're under it. Yeah, it looks like a pretty easy exit. I don't know. I suppose that's a good thing. A little rubble ramp. Yeah. Huh. Nice. Well, there you go.
As I exited back onto the Bryant Creek Trail, I couldn't believe I'd actually made it and how relatively straightforward the route ended up being considering where it went. The next few hours were serene hiking back to my bike on a very quiet trail, much quieter than it was a year earlier for some reason. Helicopter traffic to Mount Assiniboine Lodge was non-stop all day, so I think Thursday must be a fly-in day or something. The ride back was fast and fun as usual, except for the darn hill that anyone who has biked this section will remember. Honestly, I love this trip and highly recommend it for experienced scramblers looking for a rarely ascended mountain with stunning views and an engaging route. It's not often that one can nab a third ascent in 30 years via a major trail network and minimal bushwhacking in a 10-hour day from the car. It's even less common that the route is as fun and hands-on as this one, despite looking impossible from almost every angle.
Oh. Whew.